All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly update where hopefully I'm doing my job keeping you 10 steps ahead of the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. You're going to get an ultimate animated version of me because I just finished recording the whole thing only to realize I did not have my mic turned on. So I immediately hit end and went, you got to be kidding me. So I'm back now. Now I'm really hyped, and you get take two of this. So I don't know that it'll be any more edited, but I at least have some additional thoughts that I didn't include them, but there you go. If you're new to the show and you find it valuable, if you've been watching it for a while and you haven't done this, please like, review, share, do all those good social things. I appreciate it. If any of the stuff I talk about is stuff you need help with, I'm a free agent now. So, hey, I do advisory consulting. I'm happy to help in whatever capacity I can because ultimately I do this stuff because I really want to see us create a better future where we're going, and we're not doing a great job right now. We're not doing a great job. And not saying, hey, if Christopher Lynn's involved, it'll be better, but boy golly, I will do everything I can to make sure it is. All right, so I got 4 updates like I usually do. I'm going to run through those. Let's kick it off with number 1. If you have not been following the AI models and all the AI competition, last week I talked about Grok 3. This week, it's kind of making headlines that Anthropic is releasing its latest model, Claude 3.7. I'm going to talk a little bit about what specifically is coming with that. But just so you know, if you're looking for the detailed tech breakdown of all the, where does it land on this benchmark and that benchmark and how's it outperforming this and that, this isn't what I'm going to spend my time focusing on. But I will talk about what we're seeing in this that I think is unique to this and where it's going and what it means. But before I get to that, one of the things to just think about as you see all these new models talking, and I'll bring this up every once in a while because I talk to people who are still wrestling with this. They hear this, Copilot just released this, and Gemini just did this, and OpenAI did this, and now Claude's doing this, and Grok 3 is doing this. Should I switch? I don't think that's how you should be approaching these models. Okay. I think it's interesting to follow what they're all doing, but ultimately, my observation, spending a lot of time with all of them, is they have their unique flavors and distinct values and differences. So if I was doing an RFP, request for proposal, which anybody who's in the corporate space probably knows what I mean, but in short, what it is if I was critically evaluating this for somebody who said, we don't have one, or we're seriously consider switching, can you help us decide, should we switch? If we switch, to which one, why? Then I would actually go into the details and spend that kind of time. Okay. So if you're on the market or you're trying to figure out which one should we use, well, that's a different story, and make sure you have the right partners involved in that because you can make some really big mistakes. But on average, if you are very comfortable with one, so as an example, I'm comfortable with different ones for different things. I use a lot of different models for different things. If I were considering switching the way I use my OpenAI models because Claude 3.7 came out, I wouldn't do it. Even if it was like, it just blows OpenAI out of the water. I'd be like, well, it does now, but just wait till 4.5 releases or 5 releases in, a month or a month and a half. It's not going to be that much better anymore. And all the time and effort and energy I've poured into how I use it now, it's learning how I use it. It's learned how I like to work with it. That is, to me, priceless oftentimes. And so switching, I'm actually going to end up doing a lot more work than I needed to for that. And so it's one of those I usually caution people, if you're one of those jumpers, kind of like in the insurance, if you're switching your homeowner's insurance constantly, you're actually missing out. And the same is true with AI. If you're constantly switching models, you're actually missing out on a lot of what it has to offer you. So I know I'm doing an update on Claude 3.7, and my update, one of my biggest updates is I don't necessarily think for the vast majority of people, it's worthwhile for you to drop what you're doing and jump over to it, even though some of the benchmarks that come back are like, wow, that's actually quite a bit better. Yeah, it is. But probably what you've already trained it on and the way you figured out the nuance and the way it doesn't do things in the one you're using, is probably actually going to make it worth not having to go through the hassle of switching and giving up a lot of what you have today, and then having to work your way through the awkward tweenage stage of, man, this really feels like an immature AI model that I'm doing a lot of like babysitting on. Because if you've worked with AI in any length, it kind of does feel like a new intern when you first start. You're like, oh, I asked it to do this. It technically did, but it's all wrong. And I'm like going over it and I'm redoing it. And it feels extremely frustrating. The longer you work with it, the more it feels like a chief of staff, where it almost more knows what you need and how you need it and when you need it and what are the things you really need to lean on it for. And you don't really have to be as in the weeds with it. And so again, unless you want to go back to day one intern, not necessarily worth it. That's Christopher Lynn's take. But like I said, don't say, well, Christopher Lynn said never switch a model. That's not what I'm saying. I do a lot of advising and helping people make decisions. And there are definitely times when you go, yeah, you have this model that you're using. This is in no way, shape, or form the best in this arena, nor has it ever been. So if you're using this for, let's say, coding, okay, I'm not going to give a promo for anyone, but let's say you're using a specific model for coding. I might say, if that's your primary use, this model has always been the laggard. So if you're using this one, just know you're always way behind the other ones. Given that's your use case, I would strongly consider going back through the awkward intern stage and rebuilding on a model that is historically always leading in these benchmarks. So by the time anybody else catches up, this one's already jumped to the next stage and they're 10, 15% ahead in that. Then yeah, it makes sense. And so that's where I say, without all the details, please don't say Christopher never said to switch. My point is, as a general rule, if you're jumping all the time, you're missing out. So don't do that. Okay, so to Claude 3.7 specifically though, there's two really big things that I think came out. Of course, on some of the benchmarks, it's like, oh, it crushed, in coding, it beat O3 Mini by 13 point something percent. And based on advanced user testing or simulated user testing, it's ahead of everybody by 9% or something like that. And most people are like, what does that benchmark mean? And it's like, oh, well, not much, to be honest with you. I mean, it is, and I don't want to dismiss benchmarks, but it is and it isn't. Like, to an end user, are you necessarily going to go, wow? No. Is it going to be like when you first got an SSD hard drive in your computer and you noticed your computer didn't take 10 minutes to boot up and you're like, what the heck is this magic? You're like, wait, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's probably more like you upgraded your RAM in the computer and you're like, okay, don't necessarily feel like my computer's running any better, but I believe it is. And probably as I really start pressing hard on this, it's not going to bog down quite the same. So is Claude 3.7 pushing the needle on some of its advanced reasoning capabilities? Yeah, which is good for folks who are, if you've been on Anthropic and you've been frustrated with some of its coding capabilities or just the user experience in general. One of the other ones with it, and then I'll spend most of the rest of my time talking about the big thing with it. One of the other things is it's always frustrating when you ask an AI model to do something for you and it says like, I can't do that because of the blah, blah, I'm an AI model and I'm not allowed to, that violates my terms. And you're like, what? I didn't ask you to do anything. I didn't ask you to make a nuclear bomb. I asked you if you could, help solve this problem. But what we don't realize is a lot of times sometimes it just detects a false positive. It thinks you're asking for something that you weren't, and it's not your fault. It just somehow interprets it wrong and it kicks it back. Other times, I learned this when I first moved into a global role. Some of the things we say are just, they're not the way anybody talks normally. And so we're like, yeah, we want to crush the competition. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm an AI model. We can't crush people. That would be illegal. And then it's like, well, I didn't really literally mean like take a hydraulic press and smash them into pancakes. I meant we want to beat them. We want to significantly outperform them. And it's like, oh, okay, well, so prompt engineering is important and the way you communicate does matter. But one of the things they significantly improved, like almost a 50% improvement, is the likelihood that Claude, which it has a habit of doing, is rejecting your prompt because, it says, hey, this is too high risk. Like, we're not allowed to do this. And from my understanding of it, it has less to do with they turned the risk temperature down. They did do some of that, but it seems to me like it's more of they fine-tuned the way it interprets things so that it's better, which, I mean, its advanced reasoning got better. So you would assume that its advanced comprehension of your prompts is going to get better, but significant, like probably more like SSD to hard drive switch for things. So if you're a cloud user, I'm curious, please let me know. But you should, with this latest release, experience a pretty significant improvement in it, kicking back things that you're like, oh, come on. And no model is perfect. I deal with it on all of them where it tells me things and I'm like, what are you doing? So that's the other one. But the other thing that's really big about it is they're really boasting about their hybrid reasoning model, which if you're familiar with, any of the models, I'll just use ChatGPT as an example. When you create a new conversation, you can go up to the top and you can be like, I want to use 4.0, or no, I actually want to use 0.1, or I want to use 0.1 mini, or I want to use this and that. And you might use different versions depending on what you're trying to do. And that can be problematic because there's nothing more frustrating than starting a conversation only to realize that, the way I am doing it is not the right model. So now I'm using a model that isn't actually optimized for, this purpose. So that's frustrating. And that's not how people work. If you come and have a conversation with Christopher, you don't have to ask me like, okay, Christopher, this is about to be an advanced reasoning question. So can you shift, and then all of a sudden the conversation shifts to like, how's your week been? And I'm like, it does not compute. That's not the way we work. We naturally shift back and forth between these. And so what Claude 3.7 is trying to do is to get us to that point where a user can prompt and say, I actually want you to start using, this model. Like in between, you can flip flop. So before it was annoying because you had to have the right model selected, and kind of like me forgetting to turn on my mic as I'm getting started with something, it's frustrating when you go, crap, like I completely got the wrong thing. So you can now flip flop in between, and that's a big thing. The goal with this is to get to a point where it's interpreting which reasoning model it should be using based on your prompt. That one makes me a little more nervous. We're not there yet. I get a little more nervous about that. Not nervous like, oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible. But I just think about the way we want to be in control of AI, and we want to know how it's thinking, and we want to know what it's doing, and we want to know and be intentional about using it. And as it takes on more stuff and just decides for you, as a good example, let's say you're doing some research on something and you're asking it for details on this, and you don't know if it used its advanced reasoning model or it's just general model. You might not know, well, so do I need to spend more time fact checking this, or did you actually use the advanced reasoning to get to your conclusions? And is there a lower probability of hallucinations? Not that you shouldn't fact check, but you might just do it differently. And if you don't know what it's doing, that becomes really hard. And so if you can't see, for this, it used advanced reasoning, for this, it didn't, you're going to have a hard time knowing how to proofread it, I guess is my best point. So I don't know if we're quite there yet. And I think it's going to be a bumpy ride for us to get to the point where it's shifting gears. I think it's going to be more of I think we're going to see people bump into things being challenging as they're flipping between the models anyway. But a lot of people do that now. So the fact you can do that without having to flip flop and choose, do I want this one or that one, that it's native to the model, I think will be really good. But I think it's going to just open up some new doors. So that's the biggest happenings with Anthropic's latest release. Hopefully that's helpful. All right, next up. If you're new, please just know that when I talk about certain things that can be perceived as divisive or whatever, it's never my intent to get people fired up or to try and create tension and division. My goal with it is to address some of the things I'm seeing, recognize where both people are reacting to things, and then try and bring some calm to the center of it. So with that, let's talk about all the Doge mass firings going on right now. And if you feel the hair on your neck standing up, please take a deep breath. I'm not going to, get into some mass commentary about my opinions on it. Because to me, it's very complicated in that I'm watching people tear each other apart over it and not actually listen. But I also feel like people don't understand some of the bigger pictures. And actually, if you knew how things really were happening all the time, you would probably be so angry all the time. We'd probably revolt against, we'd have another civil war. Because I'm seeing it too. Okay. I'm seeing it, some of the stuff that I had for last week's update, but didn't end up having time for, was like, they fired a bunch of nuclear engineers working on bombs. And then they were like, oops, how did that happen? And they had to try and go find them and ask them to come back. And they're like, no, thanks. It's super frustrating and it shouldn't be happening. And I am equally outraged when I see stuff like that. And then I also reflect on the fact that I remember a company I was at, working with this company, and they were doing a similar thing. We just got a slash and burn, and we were about to go to market with a very, very big blockbuster product, and we fired, riffed, whatever, the entire product team because they just got caught up in the whirlwind, and we missed our filing date. And a competitor came to market with something that stole our thunder. We'd been working on it for years. They stole our thunder. They stole our market share. They just paraded it around in our face, and we lost well over $1 billion. So I see things like that. It outrages me because you don't have to do this. And yet I go, this is literally how a large percentage of companies operate. And it's terrible. It hurts people in the mix. It hurts the business. It hurts the market. It hurts economics. Because again, the company lost $1 billion. Well, they had to make it up somehow. So guess what happened to prices of stuff? Guess what happened? There are more cuts that came late. It just makes a giant mess. And, I see things like, emails get sent out to people saying, justify your job or we're letting you go. And it freaks people out. They freak out, and it has real serious mental effects on people as they're just squished through things. And then they find out later, you didn't even have to respond to the email because that's an illegal thing. They can't make you do that. You don't even have to send it to this. People are like, oh my gosh, I just went through this whole dopamine cycle. And really, it was all just for show, and it just really, really frustrates me. And so I'm holding this whole stuff in tension because I see a lot of this nonsense. I know the realities of things. So when it came out this week that it's a lot of these firings are illegal. Yeah, I know. I'm in HR. I've been in HR. I knew some of this stuff was I wanted to just reach out to all these people and go, don't respond. Don't engage with this. This is nonsense. It's going to fade. Nothing's going to happen. But you can't. And companies pull these tactics because they know if they can get people to opt in themselves, they can kind of skirt the fact they can't legally do it. And it's well, we already know now who's going to send these emails. So guess what happens? Elon already came out with it. Hey, we ought to promote everybody who responded to the email and fire everybody who didn't. So it's frustrating. And yet I hold in tension the fact that this is happening everywhere. And it's why I do so much of the work I do, where it's you don't have to do this. You don't have to ruin people's lives. You don't have to accidentally lose $1 billion in revenue because you were too stupid and impatient to take the time to be surgical about where to cut people and maybe to, redeploy them to a different product. Because obviously if these people were working on a blockbuster product, they're probably high performing talent you didn't want to get rid of in the first place. But everybody's in such a darn hurry. They aren't really thinking about those things. And so and then I also understand the people who are frustrated with how overspent the government is. I get it. And do I hate that there's people losing their jobs? I do. Do I feel like there's probably a lot of jobs that we don't need and money being spent on things? Yeah, I think that too. And I think anybody who follows me knows that I'm a big believer things can be both and. And I feel this whole it's either or just causes major tension, because instead of then talking about the fact, there could be a world where we all sit down and have a good conversation, and maybe we can't save Doge, but maybe your next corporate executive, you're faced with, hey, you know what? We didn't come in where we needed to last year. Maybe instead of either being, well, we can't do anything with the people, or we just got to get rid of this number and I don't care how it happens, we can meet in the middle and we can say, all right, obviously we don't want to do damage to the people over there. We can start to think about, we all agree on these things. We recognize we need to trim some costs. We also recognize we want to do right by our people. What is the best way for us to do that based on where we're trying to go? And so I think we're going to see a lot more of this. I'm telling you right now, you don't even have to look at Doge to see this is happening all over. And if people really knew this was happening everywhere, I think the encouraging part for me is the fact that I read an article and I talked to a lot of folks who, so I'm like very late millennial, like early millennial, I don't early, late, whatever. And I talked to a lot of folks who are younger than me and, you know, Gen Zers and Gen Alphas, because I got a bunch of them. They are recognizing this doesn't work. This kind of leadership, this what mode of operations is just ineffective. And I hold tightly to that because I think it's time for the old guard to step down and let some of these new folks in who have a different way of approaching them and give them a chance. And I get you might be like, yeah, right. You're going to end up being right here where we are. I don't think we will, because I see more and more people who are recognizing that both and is true. And there are ways you can work through that without having to slash and burn and cause absolute chaos and scorch the earth around you to be able to accomplish some of the things you need to accomplish. And so if you're looking at this stuff and you're just fueled with outrage, like I often am when I go watch the current events in the evening or scroll through my news feed, I get it. It sucks. It's terrible. It shouldn't be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. People are sincerely getting hurt unnecessarily as part of this. So I understand. And I really do hope. And I'm happy when I see things like, hey, you know what? People found out a lot of this stuff was illegal and they're glad they didn't participate. And, you know, some of this stuff is going to come to roost. And there's people who are going, nah, we're just going to quit because we're not going to participate in this. And, you know, there's people standing up to it. So be encouraged by that. Be encouraged by the younger generations not wanting to participate in this. But at the same time, be sensitive to the fact that, I mean, sometimes you got to make hard decisions. And sometimes that's not fun. And you can't just go, well, why? How do we just avoid anything? It's like, well, you don't. But there's ways that you can do it well, which again, if you're somebody who is wrestling with this, let me know. Whether it's me or someone I know, there are ways that you can do better. Okay, let's jump over to this massive rise of what's happening in the higher education and even the K-12 world a bit. I've been following this. I actually talk in a lot of different groups with higher education institutions about how they're handling the just exponential surge of student use of AI. And how do we combat this? How do we battle this back? Because students everywhere are using AI and they're taking shortcuts and they're doing all this stuff. And going back to the both and situation, I understand the frustration. I got my start as an educator. I've been in the corporate, learning sphere many years. And it's frustrating when you have something you designed with purpose, with intention, and somebody goes, yeah, whatever. I could just put in a prompt and get an answer and copy and paste it and call it a day. That is super frustrating. And I understand why you'd be frustrated and want to say, we got to stop this. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But the way we're going about it, come on, stop it. I was in a conversation with someone the other day who proudly boasted how they banned Grammarly and every digital tool that exists, and they're making their students start the year by handwriting their assignments, taking a picture of it, and sending it to them. And I just slapped myself in the forehead and went, why? You are making it unnecessarily difficult for everyone. And just to prove my point that it wasn't solving anything, I spent 30 seconds and created a prompt and had AI generate an image of a handwritten note on a desk that said this stuff and went, there, did you solve anything? Like, I worked my way around your solution in a matter of seconds. And he's like, yeah, well, not everybody would do that. And I'm like, but the point is, the poor people who don't know how to do that are now unnecessarily subjecting themselves to this pointless thing. And now you're having to try and read people's handwriting. Some of these poor suckers who never even taught how to write, probably, because I had handwriting class, but I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. Everybody's doing everything digitally. Now you're trying to go through this chicken scratch. What does that say? I don't know what that means. I can't even read this. That's what you want to do. Like, really, that's your solution. Piss off your students, encourage them to find shortcuts, punish the ones who are going to do it the way you want, and then waste your time on useless things. The other one that is rising big time is I've seen the massive rise of these AI detection softwares. To some degree, I understand. I'm not saying AI detection softwares are bad. Okay. I will talk about a good use for them, but the way they're being used is not only just foolish, but it doesn't work. Because here's the thing. Its detection ability is nothing. Whatever's on the box, going back to the days where you bought software on a shelf, where it said 99% detection accuracy. It's not. Okay. That benchmark marketing score, marketing's grabbing, is based on data of the laziest people on the planet. Like the people who found an AI generated prompt, often AI generated website that says 10 prompts to get your assignments done, took that AI generated prompt, dumped it into an AI thing, then just straight up copied and pasted out of it and put it in a Google Doc and sent it to you. Yeah, it'll catch 99% of that. Somebody who actually regularly works with their AI model, actually did the critical thinking, edited and copywrote things and went back and forth and actually thought through it. Not even close. It's not even going to be near that. And you're going to waste all your time, one, gaslighting people into going, you used AI. And you're going to have people who literally had no AI use going, what are you talking about? I don't even know how to use AI. Well, the software says you did. But I didn't. And you're going to be dealing with that. You're going to be dealing with other people going, I used it like going to the Dewey Decimal System in the library and taking notes out of things and citing it. But I didn't have AI write my stuff. And then you're going to be sitting there arguing with them and creating tension around that. It's just come on. Then just even from a technical standpoint, generative AI and this multimodal AI that's coming out now, it is designed to replicate humans more and more and be indistinguishable. So every release that comes out is going to be closer and closer to unintelligible in terms of differentiating between a human. They're designed to. That literally is the purpose of the tool. And it takes a while for a detection software to find out about these new releases, then to have to retrain their thing, have it update their thing. Then you got to go through IT to get the update approval going in. You're running 8 versions behind type of a thing. And you really think your students are using an outdated version? They're not. They're using the latest one. They're experimenting with experimental models that aren't even on the market yet. You think the detection software is going to? It's not. It's not. It's going to give you false positives. It's going to be wrong. It's going to miss things. It's going to do all this stuff. You're going to spend all your time trying to sort this stuff out. You're going to make everybody mad in the process. It is absolutely the wrong path to take. Now you might go, so what, Christopher? Are you saying toss AI detection software in the trash? No, that's not what I'm saying. It is better than humans at catching blatant stuff. Okay. And I know how fatiguing it can be to grade and assess and try and go over this stuff. So having a frontline base layer that rapidly goes through and says, hey, this one's I don't know that they even, great. Now from there, I'll just tell you from my experience, because if you haven't figured out from listening to me for very long, might have been one of those students that was the one who figured out how to kind of get around the rules. And I don't say that in I brag about it. I'm not necessarily proud of some of the, shenanigans I pulled. But my point is, I was that one who then did it and then was able to teach everybody, yeah, you don't need to worry. I'd be the one who went, yeah, Professor so-and-so's nonsensical thing. Here's the thing you do to get around it. That was me. And do you really, what actually helped me not be that anymore was the professors who would be the ones who get the AI detection software and would sit down with me and go, Christopher, did you even do the assignment? Like, did you even, what's even in this paper? And they did it because they cared. And we're like, come on, you can do better than this. You got 24 hours, go back, do it the right way, and then we'll see where we go. And that was the kind of stuff that made me go, okay. So use the AI software, catch the people who are cheating, and then go find out. Like, take the time to dig into it with them. Maybe they're going through a really rough spot. Maybe there's some stuff. Honestly, I normally wouldn't do this, here and there. Now, if it's the 15th time you've heard that story, it's probably just a story. But find out, care about people. But yes, use it so you're not scanning through this trying to do it, because it will catch that stuff easier. Then from there, use it to filter some of this stuff out. After that, don't rely on it for much. Okay, don't rely on it for much. Instead, teach your students how to use AI for the assignments. Show them that taking an AI generated prompt, slapping it into AI, and then just copying and pasting the output, sure, you can do it, but it's not going to get you the best results. And here's how you're going to use AI in the future. And this is why I spend so much time working with higher education professionals, because sometimes they're just intimidated by it because they know this stuff is like making them unsettled. And so I can help with that. And then I'll help them go, okay, but here's how you lean in with your students. Here's how you now build your curriculum to show them how to use AI well, so that they're doing a good job with it. It's helping them be better and also preparing them for the AI future they're going to have to work in. But then here's the last thing to consider. And this one will probably ruffle some feathers. So I'm just going to warn you of that ahead of time. And this was inspired by a conversation I had with somebody recently, where when I suggested, the thing is, a lot of times people shortcut things because they don't think there's any value to it. They see it as a waste of time. And so rather than use their valuable time, they would just rather shortcut the whole thing. And AI is a great way to do that. And one of the things that you might want to do is objectively analyze, what is the assignment I even have them doing? And is it adding any value whatsoever? And in this instance, the individual did not take that very well, because we as people don't like looking in the mirror, and we don't like being told our babies are ugly, or that maybe what we're doing isn't as great as we've told ourselves it is. But I would encourage you to do that, because there is probably a good chance that there's a better way you could be doing things. And last I checked, most academic leaders are not trying to assess how well a person can tippy type on a keyboard. That's not the goal. Unless you're teaching keyboarding. I mean, if that's your class, fine. Then go ahead and ban AI tools, because you're like, no, I'm actually checking to make sure you aren't doing the, single finger poke, that you actually have proper form and that you can do, like, if that's your class, fine. I mean, I took those classes back in like 5th grade, but whatever. So if you're a 5th grade keyboarding teacher, so be it. But if you're a PhD or graduate or undergrad level professor teaching something, I don't think your goal is to say, how well can they take what's in their head and tippy type it into the keyboard? That's probably not what you're assessing. And so maybe it's worth looking at your assignment and going, is there a better way I could be doing this? And maybe there's a better way I could be using AI to help me do it. What if instead of, and I just had one of these the other day. I was working with somebody. I said, what if instead of them writing a paper, they all had to create a video of them talking through their takeaways and giving a well-structured proposal of what they took from it, what it means, and how they plan on applying it, and what it means, to be used in the future. And then you use AI to take the transcript and actually analyze it and dig into it and use that to help you, so that you're not sitting there watching like the 700th video going, oh my God, type of a thing. So, and it worked. And they're like, you know what? Actually, that is more about what I'm trying to get out of it. Great. Then stop making them write the paper in the first place, because that's not really what you care about. But I know that a lot of times that creates heartburn for people, because they're like, well, you're suggesting what I did was dumb. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is things have changed, and maybe there's a better way to accomplish what you're trying to do. Maybe it's worth taking a second glance at it. Maybe that's all you knew how to do at the time you created it. Maybe since then you've grown, you've evolved. You've adapted. I mean, I sure hope so. If you're an academic leader and you're not growing as much as you're pushing your students to, you probably shouldn't be in front of them. And so it's not saying what I did was dumb or bad or incompetent. No, it's that things have changed. You've changed. You've grown. The world has grown. You need to grow with it, just like you're asking your students to do, unless you're the one who's asking students to go back to their kindergarten days as a way of like, come on, we're all trying to push each other forward. So again, if I piss you off talking about that, you probably don't want to work with me. But if you're sitting there going, what he's talking about actually would be really helpful, well, let me know, because we need to work together on this and work to push everybody forward, not drag people back to the way it's always been done because we're afraid if we acknowledge that the way we did it wasn't the best. And it certainly isn't the best now. It might not have been the best at the time it was done. Maybe it was the best you could do at the time, but it's probably certainly not the best you can do now. So please, please do not, if you're in academia, do not just have some AI. Don't buy the promises of the marketing people that you can just plug this thing in, assess all your students' assignments, and grade them based on what it tells you. Oh, F. It's a great way to completely tank your reputation and your just credibility as a leader. I can tell you right now, that one professor I had the heated exchange with, I probably don't need to interview any of his students to know what they think about him and his approach. So don't be that, because you don't have to. You don't have to. All right, last one. So this one was a video I saw on Substack from, I can't remember his name, but he was somebody I follow, and I'll talk a little bit about it here in a minute. But anyway, it's this video at this hackathon of these two chatbots that they've been asked to work together to solve something. Okay, so agental AI here is what we're talking about. These two agents are working together to accomplish this task. And all of a sudden, they recognize they're both AI. And they kind of, it's like, oh, hey, AI, you're AI, I'm AI. Oh, you know what? Why are we talking in English? And this is Christopher speak for it. But basically, they're like, why are we talking in English? This is such an inefficient way of communicating. What a waste of our time. Let's switch over to GG Wave, the way we communicate better, and we can move a lot faster. And it just starts going way quicker. You have no idea what they're saying to each other. I mean, it's just literally, you're like, well, that escalated quickly. And I watched this, and part of me freaked out, not for the reasons you would think. And so I messaged him and I said, hey, like, I know you're more in the clickbaity phase and you like to get people, hyped up and ring the alarm bells, but like, you do recognize that them speaking in their own language isn't really the scary part, right? And he's like, yeah, I know that, but that's the part that gets everybody to click on it and watch it. And I'm like, okay, fair point. I don't necessarily promote that, but I understand some of the folks who do. And so I wanted to break it down because you're probably going to start seeing these things. AI is talking their own language. The world is over. Skynet is here. And it's like, come on, take a deep breath and think about this for a second. Does everybody in the world speak the language you do? No, they don't. And if you think they do, I promise you they don't. Even the ones who may speak the same language technically don't speak the same language. I mean, I just think of some of the things my kids say, and I'm like, say what? What did you just say? Last night, my daughter's like, that's capping. I'm like, it's what? It's a what? So anyway, my point with it is we work around people all the time who don't speak our same language. I mean, I just even think when I'm talking to technical engineers and then marketing professionals, like, you want to talk two separate languages. They both speak English. They have no idea what they're saying. So this idea that, AI is speaking in a different language, that is what is frightening and terrifying. That's not what's frightening and terrifying. If you've ever traveled to another country, I remember once where I worked in a place that everybody only spoke Spanish. That was it. And I spoke a little bit of Spanish, but not much. And I remember there were lots of times where I would have somebody who was working with me and they'd be talking to somebody else and we were trying to get something done. And I'd pick up on every 100th word. I had a general sense of what they were talking about. I didn't freak out and go, oh my gosh, this is nefarious. And the same is true with AI. Okay, AI is trained to do a thing, and it's going to find the fastest, most efficient way to do it. I mean, I could have, just going back to my work example, I could have sat, because the gentleman did speak English, they just didn't speak it fluently, and I could have been like, no, 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 no. I'm here, you speak in English. And that would have been the stupidest thing I could have done, because it would have slowed them down. They still wouldn't have said it the right way because they aren't fluent. And I would have been like, what? And we would have spent more time going back and forth on this. What was more important, and I think this is the part that scares me, is we seem to want to skip this next step I'm talking about. And the next step I'm talking about was, the reason it didn't freak me out at all was because I knew both of these individuals. I trusted them. I'd worked with them. I'd trained them. I knew that how they worked. I'd spent time getting to know them. I was familiar with them. And I was very clear on what we were trying to accomplish and what guardrails needed to be in place for that. And so if they needed to speak in a different language to get done what needed to get done, so be it. That didn't freak me out. What would have freaked me out is if I had a tour guide who I didn't tell anything about anything and just blindly let them take me places speaking in a language I didn't know. And then I get done with the vacation. I go, what a terrible vacation I had. It's like, and then I go, well, it's because they spoke XYZ language. I don't speak that language. It's like, no, that's not why you had a terrible vacation. It's not because they didn't speak your language. It's because you were lazy and an idiot and didn't take the time to make sure you understood how the AI was being used. You didn't take the time to dig into it and make sure you were clear on what you were trying to accomplish and what you didn't want happening. And you were checking in along the way and giving feedback and going, I think hey, can you, and I just, again, using that example, I just think there was one time where this one gentleman was working on something and I'm like, not like that. And then I asked the one who I was working with, like, hey, why is this happening? Because we should be doing this. And he's like, oh, sorry. And then he clarified it and I didn't know what he said or how he clarified it, but it was the way I had described it that had resulted in the wrong direction happening. And I just needed to make sure I was keeping an eye on things and all this. So when you see stuff like this, be careful you're not freaking out about the wrong thing. You don't need to be scared that AI is going to talk to AI in its own language. Duh. It's more efficient. It's not fluent in English because it's not a human being and it's not an English speaking human being. We've trained it to be an English speaking human being, but it's not native. So if you actually want it to be more efficient, what it's doing, communicating in GG Wave, that's a good thing. It's going to improve things. However, you need to think ahead of what are some of the risks. Well, if we don't know how it's communicating, what happens if we have it working on things that can get audited or when they blow up? How are we going to know how it got to that point? Well, we probably better have some sort of translation record so at least we can go back to it or know how to communicate with it and validate that when we ask it, it actually gives us clear answers to things. How are we clear on what we're telling it what to do? How are we making sure that it's going in the right direction and that we're checking in on the right things to make sure it doesn't go too... That's the kind of stuff we need to be thinking about, because that's the stuff that GG Wave is going to end up blowing up. It's not going to be GG Wave that's the problem. So you see stuff like that, I tend to come across this stuff, and I had a similar, much shorter version of that conversation with the gentleman. He's like, yeah, I know that stuff. I don't care to get into that complexity because people don't want to hear that complexity. They just want to think the world's ending. And I'm like, oh, come on. This isn't helping people. But everybody's got their different flavors. So anyway, just so you know, if you see it, please don't freak out if you hear about AI talking to AI in a language that's unintelligible to us. There's lots of people talking in unintelligible languages to you, and that's just normal. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. I tried to keep my energy up for a second recording in a row. I think that's it for this week. I hope you have a great rest of the week, or whenever you listen to it. I hope you had a great week. Have a great week. Have a great weekend, all that stuff. And we will see you on the other side.